Hello everyone and welcome back to the Academia and Research Collective. Today, I wanted to go over how you can create your very own research posters and what those posters should look like and what you should put into those posters as well. And now, a research poster is a very important part of any research project. Of course, it is a thing that you present to all of your peers as well as to your science fair judges or to people at research poster conferences. So it is a very integral part of the research process. Now, what I'm actually going to do today is to actually break down my research poster from the UFSSTP program. And if you haven't seen my videos yet on my project from UFSSTP, as well as the UFSSTP experience, I highly recommend that you go watch those videos, especially one about where I break down my project, because that's what this poster is going to be based on. And I'll link those videos down below in the description. But without further ado, let's get right into the poster process. So the first thing you look at, and the first thing that I create when I build a poster is, of course, my title, which you can see up here. And so my title of my project was 3D Nerf, 3D diffusion-based voxel optimization or volumetric denoising in neural radiance fields. That should be in big, bold letters. What I like to think is that if someone is standing quite a far distance away, they can still read what your poster is and still read about what your project is about. And then immediately under that, I have my name, which I bold and underline, and then I put my affiliations. And so with this project, I was part of the Focus Lab at UF, and I was also am a student at Academy at the Lakes. And so those are my affiliations. And then in the top corners of this top banner section, I have my affiliation, which is UF, and also the Focus Lab. That's just an aesthetics thing. You can have those there or not have those there. I chose to have those there because I thought that the UF logo and the Focus Lab logo both look pretty cool, but that's a decision that you can make for yourself. I know that projects a lot of times might put little icons there that are related to the projects, and so I've seen projects about genes that have a DNA symbol in the corner, or maybe for computer science they have a few pictures of their code in the corner as well. So it's really up to you about what you want to put there to make your poster look good. And then immediately the first thing we have, and the first thing you'll see in the top left, is motivation. And so this poster is, of course, a more STEM-oriented poster, but I see a lot of times what people put in the top left corner is either their abstract or really what the problem is that they're trying to solve. And so if we zoom in here, I have a few bit of text that I talk about and some background information. And so some of the background that you need to understand for a project is what a neural radiance field is and what volumetric noise is. And in this very little text, I basically describe very quickly what the project and the problem is trying to solve. That is the issue of denoising. But of course, I supplement this text with images, and you'll see that is a key theme throughout this poster, is that you do not want to have that much text. Really, you want to try to minimize the text as possible because you're going to be presenting this and you're going to be talking to your judges. Your judges aren't going to be wanting to be reading all of this stuff on your poster while you're talking. They want to look at images. And so each section that I have has images here. So you can see here exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about volumetric noise. And here's a diagram that I can reference when I'm presenting that talks about what a neural radiance field is. I also have my presentation in mind when I'm creating my poster because I'm trying to use as much images as possible. So it's very easy for me to explain complex concepts. But anyways, the first section is the motivation or your abstract. Depends on maybe what your lab wants or maybe what you personally want as well. But the key thing is to have a lot of images, and it's firstly talk about the issue that you're trying to solve, and it gives some basic background. You'll also notice that I bold a lot of words when I have text. This is a half aesthetics thing and half practicality thing. I'm just bolding the key words so that when judges quickly glance at my text, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So this is a NERF, it's used for novel view synthesis, it does stuff for 3D, and it calculates a density value, and it uses MLP, which is a type of minor AI algorithm. And so that's why I bold texts. The next thing I talk about is my contribution, and this is basically the last, well, not last, but this is one of the only like a major dense text heavy sections that don't really have that much images. So in the contribution, I basically give a top down of my project. First thing I talk about is I give my research question. And of course, ARC has posted videos of how you can generate your own research question before. Check out our Introduction to Research series to figure that out. But here, I give my research question, which in this case was how can we use NERFs to generate accurate 3D representations? And then I, for myself, list my goals, which was to use 3D diffusion. I give a minor explanation. And I list my other goal, which is to use density attenuation, which I give another goal. And then I condense my contribution into a few steps, which is to construct a NERF and then apply a 3D diffusion model to it and then be able to minimize noise. And so the reason I have a contributions tab here is because, and this is of course geared towards more like a science fair type of presentation, but when I have a contribution section, it's important because judges, when you're talking to them, they love hearing about your process. They want to know exactly what you did to get there. And so by condensing my steps down into like 3 major steps and then talking about the things that I want to solve with my research question and my goals about what I want to do, that kind of gives them like a baseline layer of what they should expect as you go on through your project. It just keeps everything very organized, and it gives a very comprehensive timeline of exactly what you did. You have your research question, then you set out your goals, and then here's what I'm going to do with those goals to actually ensure my project. And so having a comprehensive timeline for the judges to follow along, I found, especially your science quiz, is super, super useful, which is exactly why I have this contributions tab. And then immediately under it, for my project here, I talk about 3D diffusion. This was a major, major part of my project, and I wanted to dedicate one box to it that really highlights exactly what it is. But this still follows the whole flow thing, right? Because I'm just going to talk about my motivation first, talk about what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to go into a bit more background, some specific background, before I lead into my major methodology proposed framework. So here in the 3D diffusion section, I have a big image right on top here. I found this image really cool because, of course, I was working at UF, and this diffusion generates a gator, which I thought was cool. So if you have images on your posters, maybe you can try to make them interesting, or at least visually appealing at the very least. And here I just basically talk about what 3D diffusion is, and then during my actual presentation when I'm speaking, I'll of course be like, 3D diffusion, it turns random noise into actual objects, but it learns by adding noise to those objects. And so this is enhanced by this image. Once again, I have in mind that when I'm presenting, I'm going to reference this image. And also, this is a great way to talk about when you're presenting, you should be pointing at your board. When you're talking to your judges, point and tell them this is the image I'm talking about. If you don't understand what I'm saying with words, maybe this will help you understand. Images in your board are there to supplement your presentation. Under in this corner, I have the additional information. I actually don't really talk about this in my presentation. It's just there in the bottom left-hand corner, and I give a few things that I find are important to my research that I couldn't include in my poster. So I have my abstract here, my paper, my references that are on this poster, and also the link to my lab there right below it. This is something I skip over in the presentation, but I keep it minor in the bottom corner of my poster just to fill it up, but also give important information that judges or scientists might want to know more about. Then, of course, we get to the meat of the poster, the big part of the poster. The thing that catches your eye first probably is this huge diagram I have here. There's images of tanks, there's images of random cubes, there's math equations, there's random diagrams here. This is the heart of my poster, and this is my entire framework condensed into mainly images. Now, this will look different for every single poster. For a computer science poster, it might be easier to do this because maybe sometimes you can break up your code and the way you're visualizing things with AI and stuff in the diagrams. And so that's exactly what I chose to do. I chose to start with images, and then I run through the exact process of what my code is doing, all using basically images. I have a bit of math here, and I label everything. But I'm able to do this, accomplish this with images. Now, maybe if you have another project that's more different and complex, maybe you need a supplement of some more text. But the thing I tell you is, and the thing that I emphasize over and over again, is that you should have as much images as possible. Let's say you're in a biology lab and you're working with different plants, and you need to talk about their genes or something. Show images of that. Show images of the plants, show images of the genes, show images of the tools that are used, use arrows and diagrams. I always try to emphasize use as many of those things as possible. If your board is just a wall of text, there's no need for your presentation. But your presentation is important because you're speaking about it. And also, no one wants to look at a board that's just plastered of text. But when you look at a board that has a lot of images, you'll naturally be drawn to it because you'll want to know, and you'll be thinking to yourself, I wonder what those images mean. So that's why when you talk about everything on your board, you should have as much images as possible. And of course, if you go watch those videos about where I break down what my project is, you'll understand exactly what these diagrams and images mean. But once again, remember, your poster is there to supplement your presentation. Reference your images. When I'm talking, I'm going to be pointing at these images and talking all about it. But of course, I make this part of my poster the biggest thing. Really, when you look at my poster, the first thing you'll see probably is my methodology and proposed framework, because that is exactly what I've contributed. What I've contributed to computer science research is this proposed framework, which is right here front and center in all of its glory with all of its images. And then the next big section under it is the results section. Now, the results section is, of course, very important. That's where you go into all of the different things. But once again, here I have a lot of images right here. And right above it, though, I also have some qualitative data. This is quantitative and this is qualitative. And that's something I think that everyone should do. You definitely have images of your results. Let's use the bio example from earlier. If you're working with some plants genes, and let's say you modified those genes for something, show some images of those results, right? put them on the board, label them, and then when you're presenting, you can reference those images. But of course, I also have some qualitative data. Maybe you were measuring, this is probably a bit trivial, let's say you were measuring the plant height, right? Well, get some of those data tables on there, or get some graphs on there that show this qualitative data. And so right up here, I have my qualitative data, which is comparisons against current state-of-the-art models, and I use 3 metrics. Now, whenever I use metrics, something that I like to do is that on the side, I like to talk about what those metrics are. PSNR is this, SSIM is this, LPIPS is this. That way, that if someone, maybe if they weren't super familiar with those metrics, they could just read that quickly and understand exactly what you're talking about. It's really useful. Sometimes, I'm going to think about this from a science perspective. A lot of times, judges go back to your project after you aren't there presenting. After all the students are done presenting from the set time, judges a lot of times go back to projects that they deem to be worthy of maybe receiving an award or moving on to the next level of competition, and they'll go back to those boards and look at them. Well, when those judges go back to look at those boards, we want them to know exactly what the board is talking about, even if you're not there. So instead of just having random metrics like PSN or LPIPs, which they have no idea what those mean, give them a small explanation. LPIPs compares images based on a visual human perception using a deep neural network. Boom. Okay, so if I'm a judge, I read that and I go, okay, so it's using like a human-based visual system. That makes a lot of sense to me. So you just want to explain these minor things. These minor details are what I find make the biggest differences in poster boards. So if you have some terms that you think need to be described, definitely describe them. It doesn't have to be just in results section. I happen to do it in the results section as well. And then right under it, I have all of my qualitative comparisons. Of course, I think I mixed it up earlier. This is quantitative and this is qualitative. My apologies. We're all scientists here, so we're still learning. But that was a minor mistake. This is all qualitative comparisons of my results here. And so I show my ground truth, which is what I've done, and all of my other comparisons. And so when I'm talking about my results, I'm going to be like, hey, look, this is the ground truth, and this is what I achieved. Look at how much better it is compared to those 2 models, right? These images are striking. If a judge is looking at them, they're going to be like, wow, I see the difference that you've made in this research. And that's the important part, right? Images, you're going to reference them, use as many images as possible. And then after that, up here, I actually talk about training views, and this part of the poster I actually should have talked about beforehand because I actually referenced this in the beginning. Usually a lot of times people might not exactly understand how we can use neural radiance fields to generate 3D representations, so I'll give them this. Basically what I'll say is that each of these red rectangles represents the angle of a 2D image, and what we're trying to basically do is fill in all that white space so that wherever you're looking at it, you can tell that this is a garbage can. And so what our AI model is doing is predicting all that white space, and so this gives them a better visual representation of exactly what a neural radiance field does. And usually I will reference this. Actually, when I'm talking about this, I'll just point over here and be like, look, this is exactly what I'm talking about if you're confused about how neural radiance field works and how we go from 2D to 3D. There was really not much space to finagle in this poster. That's why I plopped it over here. But I also think that this image is just really cool. And so sometimes you have images that are really cool, visually appealing, that you want to put in a poster board. Try to put it on there. If it makes your board stand out, if it's relevant to your research and it looks super cool like this image here, put it on your poster because it might help out. Now, this is not saying like put random images on there that you will never talk about. No, put images on there that look cool, but also can supplement exactly what you're talking about. So the reason I put this here is because neural radiance fields, when you're trying to understand how an AI model can turn 2D images into 3D models, it might be a bit difficult to understand. Well, this image can help supplement that and make it easier to understand. Finally, I talk about my future work here. And so here I talk about what I wanted to do next, was do training acceleration, adaptive attenuation, and adaptation to other fields. Basically, I was just talking about what I'm going to do next. A lot of times science fair judges love asking you, so what are you going to do next with this project? I'm going to preempt that and be like, look, I've already thought of exactly what I want to do with this project. I've thought of it so much, in fact, I'm going to put it on my research poster. And so this was how I made my board at UF. But something that you can do is that a lot of times I know people put analysis sections and conclusion. And so in their conclusion, they talk about exactly what they've done and what they found out, which is all great. And there was also an analysis section. And a lot of times that analysis section is just diving more deep into the quantitative or qualitative data. I chose to omit that there because I knew that we were going to have an oral presentation this time around. So I knew I could just talk about my results quantitatively and do that analysis verbally. Also didn't really need a conclusion because the results the conclusion of this project is that we created a new model. And so I thought that it would be more useful to put training views and future work on my poster board instead of having a direct analysis inclusion section. Now, of course, this poster I was not entered into a science fair for. This is just for my summer program. But if I was entering into a science fair section, I might consider adding a quick analysis and a quick conclusion section, maybe shrink some of these images here. And that's something that you should do as well. In fact, I think that adding those images is not a necessarily bad thing. Adding those sections is not necessarily a bad thing, especially for some projects where the data analysis is really, really crucial. If you're working in some other labs where your results you need to compare to other things and where you need to, talk about some specific metric of data analysis, then have a data analysis section. But a lot of times, for some comp sci projects as well, data analysis just falls to the comparison against current state-of-the-art models, which I have of the both quantitative and qualitative data. Both of those I have. So I'm going to actually pop over to my board from last science fair. As you can see here on my board, I have a data analysis section, a conclusion section, and then a future work section. And so that's what I was talking about, is that sometimes you might feel the need to have a data analysis and conclusion section. I certainly did for my poster board for my last project. And you can see here for my data analysis, I had some comparisons against current models. I did some calculations like the p-value, and then I talked about my conclusions for the 3 biggest takeaways, and then my future work section, and also a key citation section. And a note here is that if there's a little thing at the end, you can't really fit something in there, throw in a key citations. That's what I did here. I had a little space left. I was like, you know what, let me put some of my citations that I think that I would definitely need to reference or are important to my project right at the corner at the bottom. I think it's something that's professional. For the 3Devo Nerf board, I just have it as a QR code, but here I actually made it a mini section. It really is dependent on you. And so speaking of dependent on you, that's really this whole basis of creating science fair boards, is that it should really be about what you want. Does your project need a data analysis section? Do you want to have a data analysis section that will show off your project? Yes or no, it's up to you. But do you want a conclusion section? That's highly important to your research. Yes or no, that's up to you as well. And so really all of these choices are things that you can make on your science fair board. And so popping back over to my 3Devo Nerf board, this board, of course, is significantly different than last board, but the general structure of these science fair boards are the same. We start with a title, we talk about a bit of background information, what we're going to do, gives a bit more background if it's relevant, talk about this whole methodology is a big section with a lot of images, your results, and then your future works and ending section. And so, this board, how you make it is totally up to you. But in the end, you want to keep these things in mind, is that when you're presenting to your science fair judges or presenting to your people, you want to tell a coherent story. And that's what this board is here to supplement you for. Like I talked about earlier in the video, you want that timeline that you can reference when you're talking about. And so this board is literally your timeline. You start with what encouraged you to do this in the first place? Why did I come up with this project? What's the problem I'm trying to solve? Then you go into, so this is the research question I came up with, and here are the goals that I created for myself. If you look back at our introduction to research series, this is the exact type of steps that we did. And then you do research and you figure out some background information that you'll need to know and that your judges will need to know. And then you get into your whole methodology, and then you test it and you have your results, and then you have your future works or your conclusions, right? And so this board is your timeline, and having a coherent timeline for your judges when you're presenting and when they look at your project is so important. It keeps your judges organized, and it's also so much easier for you to present because you can just gesture at things. But in the end, the board is how you want to make it. The only big tips that I try to give is to try to keep it as organized as possible, show a timeline, and to use images. I'm going to say it again, is to use as many images as possible. Text won't get you very far without a lot of images, and also images just make your board visually appealing. So after watching today's video, I hope that you have a good idea now of what you should include in your science fair poster board and how you should be organizing your science fair poster boards. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching the Academia Research Collective, and I'll see you next time.